Hearing is about to resume, so please take your seats.
Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear me?
I can indeed.
Good. And Mr. Bourke, can you see and hear me?
I can, thank you.
Good. I can hear you. Mr. Bourke, before lunch, just want to, clarify, where we got to. I think your evidence was that, as at the date of the email we were just discussing, 9th March 2015, from Andrew Parsons, at that point you were aware of the existence of this Deloitte report. Is that right?
I don't believe so. I was aware of the existence of balancing transaction, not of the Deloitte report.
Right. So let me just bring up that document again so that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. So I'll just get the reference. It's Pol 001294447. Thank you. So as we see, it's from Andrew Parsons. You're copied in. And it says Roderick and everyone else by copy. And then on the third substantive paragraph down, it says the Deloitte report, cited by Simon below, describes balancing transactions. And I thought, having reviewed the transcript, that your evidence was that at this date, you were aware of the existence of the Deloitte report.
No, and I apologise if there was any, if I didn't express myself clearly. I think I was aware of balancing transactions being possible quite early on, but I didn't know they had been covered by a Deloitte report. It was something that was relayed to me, I think, in correspondence I'd been shown between James Davidson and I think Roderick Williams sometime back in 2014.
So on reading this email, your evidence is, and reading, as I say, the Deloitte report cited by Simon below, on reading that, your evidence is you were not aware of the existence of the Deloitte report.
I don't believe so, no.
Is your evidence you didn't read this email?
No, my evidence is that I read this top sheet, but I didn't go on to read the exchange which accompanies it.
So your evidence is that you read the paragraph that says the Deloitte report cited by Simon below describes the balancing transaction process. You read that sentence.
I did, yes.
So presumably at that point then you must have been aware of the existence of this Deloitte report.
Sorry, I think we're just talking across purposes. I obviously, having read this email, was aware of a Deloitte report. Now, I was previously aware of balancing transactions. This was not new news to me. The Deloitte report, however, was, and I think the Deloitte report being referred to there, is the Project Zebra report, which I only became familiar with in the context of the Swift review.
Well, the Swift review is later than this.
I accept that, yeah.
And so I'll ask for one last time, on reading this email, do you accept that you were informed of the existence of the Deloitte report that described balancing transactions?
I accept that I was made aware through this email of a Deloitte report which describes balancing transactions.
Thank you. That document can come down. You said you were aware, we've covered, you said you're already aware of balancing transactions. Reading the transcript before, your evidence was that you were not aware of other issues raised in relation to data integrity, such as in relation to baskets in the Deloitte report. Is that right?
That is right, yes.
Could we look, please, at poll 41059. This is a draft of one of the complaint review and mediation scheme reply of Post Office Ltd to Second Sight's briefing report part 2. Were you involved in contributing to the drafting of this document?
Yes, I was.
Please could we look at page 57? Paragraphs 14.5 and 14.6. It says it has always been possible for Post Office to correct errors in and or update a branch's accounts. This is most commonly done by way of a transaction correction. However, it could also be by way of a balancing transaction or a transaction acknowledgement. It goes on to talk about balancing transactions. 14.6, all of these processes for correcting/updating a branch's accounts have similar features. All of them involve inputting a new transaction into the branch's records, not editing or removing any previous transactions, and all are shown transparently in the branch transaction records available to sub-postmasters, as well as in the master ARQ data. Do you know why this didn't refer to the distinction with balancing transactions, that a sub-postmaster did not have to accept a balancing transaction, whereas they did with transaction acknowledgements and transaction corrections?
No, I don't. I was involved in assembling this document, but not for the substantive detailed content where it applies to technical issues. As we've previously discussed, and I think it says in paragraph 14.5, the use of a balancing transaction was only used once, at least in the context of Horizon Online. And
That's a different issue, Mr. Bourke. You say you were involved in drawing it together, but based on the knowledge you had, you would know that you would have known that was incomplete, wouldn't you?
Sorry, in what respect?
In that it doesn't refer to balancing transactions being capable of inserting a transaction without the sub-postmaster accepting it.
Without the postmaster accepting it, I agree, but it leaves an auditable mark.
So I'll ask again, why wasn't it included in this?
I honestly don't know. I didn't write this section.
Do you know if this wording of the draft, or can you recall if this wording of the draft made it into the final document?
No, I can't.
That can come down, thank you. I want to move on and look at a matter with to do with Panorama. Please can we bring up 2 zeros 140211. This is titled Panorama Meeting Tuesday, June. Would that be June 2015?
Yes, it would have been.
This is on Bond Dickinson notepaper. We see if we go down, sorry, there's Matt Bardo is listed there. Was this a meeting with people from the researchers from the BBC?
This was an on-the-record background briefing that Mark Davies initiated with Matt Bardo, and I think there was one other individual present at the meeting as well from the BBC, yes.
And was this recorded and then transcribed?
I assume so, yes.
Could we look, please, at page 18? And if we could go to the very bottom. We see Matt Bardo says, mindful of the time, but wants, if I just say remote access, you will immediately know what I'm going to ask about. And then if we go over the page, the end says, so what exactly is possible and what exactly isn't possible as far as you're concerned when it comes to accessing transactions on a branch terminal? And then if we go down, please. Thank you. You can see Angela van den Bogert gives an answer. It says, I think the question is really, can anybody access the branch data without an audit trail? Tim Robinson says, yes, without the sub-postmaster's knowledge. Angela van den Bogert says, yes, and the answer to that is no. Matt Bardo, sorry, when you say an audit trail, you mean an audit trail that is completely transparent to the sub-postmaster? Angela van den Bogert says, yes. Did you agree with that position at the time?
Yes.
So, was it not your understanding that a balancing transaction could be inserted into branch accounts without the sub-postmaster's knowledge?
On the basis that an audit trail is available to the postmaster, then, I mean, I don't want to get into semantics, but the audit trail shows that that transaction was not, or sorry, not that transaction, but that insertion was not created by the postmaster, and it is therefore not something that I would say is out with the knowledge of the postmaster.
So you're saying it's within the sub-postmaster's knowledge because the transaction could go in without their knowledge, but they could, to the best of your belief, look at an audit trail and see that an external transaction has been inputted into their branch accounts.
Yeah, if they are doing their daily cash declarations and reconciling their accounts as they were required to do under the terms of the contract, the transaction would identify itself as having been something done by somebody else, and therefore it would have been transparent to the postmaster.
And do you think that that position that we've discussed there is adequately conveyed by Angela van den Bogard simply by saying that with excuse me, that transactions cannot be inserted without the sub-postmaster's knowledge?
Well, I mean, I think, look, you could go on to explain it more fully, but I don't think she was being disingenuous when she was saying that. It was a shorthand. That, as I say, if the postmaster is looking at his or her accounts, as they're required to do, this would be something that would highlight itself as being something that they didn't recognise as being from them. So, to that extent, it would have been within the sub-postmaster's knowledge, not necessarily at the time that the insertion was made, but certainly very soon after it had been done.
That's really something I wanted to ask you. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Stevens, but when you talk about an audit trail, what do you mean by that? That if they looked at the audit available to them on a given day, then if there had been an assertion, they could notice that although amongst all the various transactions, there was one that didn't bear their hallmark, yeah?
Correct.
If they didn't look at it on that particular day, they wouldn't know, would they? Because they then wouldn't have access to the relevant part of the audit trail.
My understanding is that in Legacy Horizon, and then subsequently in Horizon Online, they had 42 days in the former case of audit available to them in branch, and in the latter 60 days of audit. So if they were trying to balance their accounts as they were required to do by their contract, it wouldn't have taken long to identify it.
So, sorry, say that again. They had 42 days where the audit trail would remain in Legacy Horizon. And what about on Horizon Online?
60 days. It has been extended
60,
another 18.
60, right, fine. Okay, thank you.
I think the reason for those time periods, sorry, just to build on that, if it's helpful, I think the timings, the 42 and 60 days, were designed to enable them to complete all their cash declarations, both weekly, daily, and monthly, that they needed to in a full cycle of available audit data.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, because it's something in which the inquiry we may need to follow up, is it your evidence that the understanding you've just given about the data that was available to sub-postmasters on the audit, as you say, your understanding, did that come from Fujitsu?
Yes, we were consistently told that any insertion that took any injection of a transaction would always be auditable.
I'm asking a slightly different thing. That I'm saying not auditable as a broad matter, but available for the sub-postmaster to see in branch within the 42 or 60 days.
That's my understanding. Yes.
And your understanding came from Fujitsu. Is that your evidence?
Yes.
Please, could we turn the page on the document to page 21? And if we could go down to a bit further, please. you start talking about remote access, the part I want to look at is Tim Robinson says, but not without the knowledge of, and you say, but not without the knowledge, and it is being used once and once only in the entire time Horizon has been effective. It happened as part of the pilot. That is what a pilot is supposed to surface, and it was done, you know. At this point, did you know that balancing transactions or something equivalent to balancing transactions hadn't been used in Legacy Horizon?
No, I didn't. I'm afraid I probably didn't draw the distinction between the two systems. My understanding was that balancing transactions had only been used once. And as it turns out, that would have been as part of the pilot for Horizon Online.
Thank you. That document can come down. I want to move to look at the Swift review, please. Can we bring up your witness statement, page 86, paragraph 181. You said, my recollection is that Post Office Ltd remained concerned about unresolved disputes following the closure of the scheme and wished to provide reassurance that it was doing all that it was reasonable to do to seek to resolve those disputes. J. MacLeod, or possibly me, felt that Post Office Ltd's incoming chairman, Tim Parker, who was without any vested interest, could perform that role, supported by external counsel, who is entirely independent from the team at Post Office Ltd. So my understanding of that is you're saying the provenance of what we now call the Swift review was either an idea by you or J. MacLeod.
I think that's right, although the actual instruction for it to begin was given by Baroness Neville Rolfe, but I don't know whether that was as a result of discussions we'd had with the department and it was adopted as their solution. But my recollection is that I think the initial idea probably emanated from us.
Could we look, please, at poll 20153-064? So this is an email from you to J. MacLeod on the 2nd of September 2015. So before the Swift review, effectively. And you say, following a recent further and pretty major, I gather, wobble on BNR, that's Baroness Neville Rolfe, isn't it, BNR?
Yes.
Was that, yes, sorry.
Yes, it was.
Now, in your witness statement at paragraph 130, you say that wobbles referred to episodes of discomfort and concern on the part of Baroness Neville Rolfe. Do you stand by that?
Yes, I do.
In fact, was what you were meaning here that Baroness Neville Rolfe had wobbled from the party line, that no further investigation was necessary?
No. It is unsurprising to my mind that when faced with colleagues in the House suggesting there's more, that the Panorama programme revealed all sorts of things, that, her confidence would have been shaken. And it is only a reference to the fact that, when faced with something that is difficult, challenging, that ministers, will feel like any normal human being, ups and downs in terms of the confidence they've got in the matters before them.
Well, the second paragraph, you refer to an email from MPs Andrew Bridgen and Kevin Jones. They said it would appear Oliver Letwin requesting an early further meeting on the back of the very serious findings of the Panorama investigation. It goes on to say in the last sentence, the email goes on to suggest that someone like Sir Terry Lee, or ex-CEO of Tesco, or Stuart, now Baron Rose, would be ideal. Now, that was referring to those two people being good people to oversee an independent review, wasn't it?
Yes.
And you say beyond bizarre, but there you go. Do you see that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, is it not the case that you were against the idea of a further investigation into the matters which have been described as sparrow issues?
At that stage, I didn't feel it was a sensible course of action. I think at this stage, we had the CCRC already engaged in conducting its important work, and it wasn't immediately clear to us that that the Panorama programs had, in fact, unveiled anything terribly new. The whistleblower in question, despite our repeated efforts to understand what he was alleging, came to nothing. And I note that in the Swift review itself, I think Jonathan Swift comes to the conclusion that it wasn't entirely clear what person it was, Richard Roll, was actually suggesting had happened or was possible.
Okay, so 2nd of September, then you're against the idea of the review. Before going back to the Swift review, let's just look at the next paragraph. You refer to internal discussions about key risks, and you say, bluntly, while BIS officials do a sensible enough job of relaying information, we are less confident about their ability, willingness to provide her with proactive, robust advice and deliver difficult messages. Is this in effect a criticism of shareholder executive decisions for not putting a post office spin on information relevant to the sparrow issues?
No, it's got nothing to do with spin. It's a question of whether or not they were relaying the strength of our case effectively.
Could we please bring up POL 30041135? So this is a letter dated the 7th of September 2015 to Baroness Neville Rolfe from J. MacLeod. We see it refers to a meeting on the 6th of August, briefing about matters relating to the BBC Panorama documentary. If we could turn, please, to page 4. It says, way forward, at our meeting on 6 August 2015, you advised that you would ask the new chairman, Tim Parker, to review the Post Office's position. So is it not the case that this idea did come from Baroness Neville Rolfe in early August 2015, rather than coming from you?
Not necessarily, no, for the simple reason that we would have discussed these matters with Richard Callard and Laura Thompson, and it may have been during the course of those conversations that the ideas surfaced. As I say, I can't be sure where the initial idea came from. But I did say a second or two ago that certainly the decision to launch it was taken by Baroness Noble-Rolfe.
Yes, but Mr. Bourke, in your evidence, you suggest that the idea came from either you or Jay McLeod. We went to an email on the 2nd of September 2015 when you were against the idea of some sort of review, and this tells us that Baroness Neville-Rolfe on the 6th of August 2015 advised that she wanted Tim Parker to look at Post Office's position. It's pretty clear, isn't it, that the idea for the Swift review didn't come from you?
As I said, I'm not sure about that, but I think we're talking at cross purposes. I think the calls being made by Kevin Jones and others was for a different sort of review, i.e. a judicial review, a government-sponsored review, rather than something like this, which was one step below that, but would hopefully, well, as it goes on to say in that very paragraph, so we would welcome your department support in resisting the current calls for a public inquiry. So that's what we were objecting to, not the review that Tim Parker eventually undertook.
Could we look, please, at the Swift review itself? It's poll 406355. Now, this is a detailed report. I'm not going to take you through all of it. Could we look, please, to page 51? Thank you. If we could bring paragraph 145 into view, thank you. So it says, it seems to us that the Deloitte documents in particular pose real issues for Post Office Limited. The Deloitte documents, I think, referred to there are the Project Zebra documents from 2014. Is that right?
That's my understanding, yes.
It says, first, both the existence of the balancing transaction capability and the wider ability of Fujitsu to fake digital signatures are contrary to the public assurances provided by Fujitsu and Post Office Limited about the functionality of the Horizon system. Fujitsu's comment we quote above seems to us to be simply incorrect, and Post Office Limited's Westminster Hall response is incomplete. Now, pausing there, that was the response we were referring to earlier, wasn't it, in January 2015?
Yes, that's right, yes.
So this is effectively it's directly saying in terms that response was incomplete based on what was in the Deloitte report. Now, following receipt of this advice, did you inform either shareholder executive or UKGI about the fact that the Westminster Hall response was incomplete?
I don't think we did so in terms of an immediate call into the department, no, but we shared the output of the Swift review with Baroness Neville through a letter from Tim Parker.
Well, let's be careful there. You said we shared the output of the Swift review with Baroness Neville-Rolfe. What do you mean by the output?
Well, I haven't got the letter in front of me, but I think it detailed, I think it went into some considerable detail about both the positive and adverse findings that Sir Jonathan made.
I see. So just to be, your evidence is that what Baroness Neville-Rolfe was told about the Swift review is contained in the letter or correspondence from Tim Parker, and there wasn't further oral briefings on it?
I honestly can't remember whether there was. I imagine conversations took place at official level because they would have been. UKGI would have been interested in, because it was UKGI by the stage, would have been interested in what was going on. But I honestly can't remember the detail of these conversations. So it's entirely possible that that was communicated to them, but I can't specifically recall that happening.
Can we look, please, at poll 20103110? So if we can go down the page slightly, please. We see there Jane McLeod to Tim Parker on the 22nd of January 2016. So my understanding is this was shortly after a draft of the, some indication had been given as to Jonathan Swift's recommendations to Tim Parker, but not a final report. A final report hadn't been completed. Is that right?
Yes, I think Tim Parker received a draft report in the week of the 11th of January.
And if we go again to the top of the page, we see that this email was sent to you there. So if we can go, please, back down to Jane McLeod's email and over the page to briefing to the Minister. So we also discussed with Jonathan whether there was any limitations from his perspective on the content of your briefing to the Minister. Jonathan confirmed that there were no limitations from his perspective, although he noted that if a physical or electronic copy were provided, this could result in the loss of legal privilege in connection with the document, recognising in the absence of privilege, the report could be disclosable under a Freedom of Information request. So accordingly, our recommendation is that you provide a verbal briefing to the Minister that in response to the question, and it goes on. When it says our recommendation, was this, was our, including the team, including you?
No, I think she's referring to the recommendation. I think she could have easily have said my recommendation, but I think what she was referring to there is the recommendation both of her and Jonathan Swift.
Did you discuss the whether or not the Swift review should have been shared with the Minister as a document in itself with Jane McLeod or Tim Parker?
Not personally, no. At least I don't think I did, no.
Please could we turn to poll 30249111. So we have at the top an email from Jane McLeod to you. It's in response to an email that you sent earlier that day. If we could go down to that, please. You said, as promised, I spoke to Laura Thompson about any developments she might have to report on how best to communicate the shift in focus to the litigation and away from the review. Do you have any recollection of that conversation?
A vague one, but yes, I remember the conversation having taken place.
What's your recollection of the conversation?
Well, I think there was a discussion, because this, I think, came once proceedings had been issued. And there was a question mark about whether or not the recommendations that Jonathan had made, 8 in total, should be taken forward under the aegis of his review, or whether, in the light of proceedings having been issued, they should instead be taken forward under the, through the exercise to defend the litigation.
Did you tell Laura Thompson anything about the content of the recommendations in the Swift review?
I'm sure over the intervening period, I would have told her about the sort of headline facts, yes.
And what headline facts would you have told her?
Well, there was some follow-up to be done on the IT front. We've just been speaking about some of those. There was a question mark about whether or not the NBSC, the helpline, for want of a better expression, was providing sensible and accurate advice to those people calling it. There was a recommendation on the question of whether or not the charge for theft was being properly levelled, was probably being made in certain cases. So I think there are 8 in total. I can't remember each and every one of them individually, but I would have given her or Richard Callard or both a heads up on what remained to be done. This was, an exercise that we felt was important to ensure that we had done everything that we reasonably could to address the complaints that had been initially raised in the context of the complaint and mediation scheme.
Would you have said anything about the Deloitte reports, the Project Zebra reports?
I don't think I would have used the word Project Zebra because I don't think I ever knew about that code name for it. I think it's unlikely. I think I would have, insofar as I talked to her about the specifics, it would have just been about the specifics rather than about, particular names.
I want to look at one aspect of the recommendations which was taken forward, and that's Project Bramble. Could we please look at poll 30299990? So this is an email from Andrew Parsons to you and others on the 13th of July 2016, and it says, I wanted to give you a heads up on the remote access issues that have been revealed through Deloitte's preliminary reports. Now, this was, as we say, Project Bramble. It was one of the things Deloitte was looking at are matters to do with remote access on the recommendation of Jonathan Swift. Is that broadly fair?
No, that's entirely accurate.
And what was your role in relation to Project Bramble?
So I convened a meeting with colleagues from, 1 or 2 colleagues from the business, and also 3 people from Deloitte, Andrew Whitten, Mark Westbrook, and there was one other person whose name escapes me. And effectively that was a meeting called with a view to initiating Project Bramble. We were very clear on the back of Sir Jonathan Swift's review that we wanted to, well, Tim already indicated as soon as he got the draft that he wanted all the recommendations accepted and followed through. And so even before the finalised report reached him on, I think, the 8th of February, we had already begun work to scope what would need to be done by Deloitte in order to satisfy his recommendations. So I attended, I convened a meeting to initiate that project.
And it seems that you're still involved as a identified recipient of the summary of Andrew Parsons' advice when the first preliminary report is produced. So at this stage, what's your ongoing involvement?
Well, I think it's beginning to reduce only because I think my role changed. But at this stage, I'm obviously I have been involved in the scheme and I've been involved in some of the debates about remote access. And one of the reasons I think Andrew Parsons is sharing this with me is because it extends very substantially the understanding that certainly I had, and as I understand it, my colleagues had, of what was possible in terms of remote access by Fujitsu.
Well, in your own words, could you set out what your understanding was of that expansion?
Well, we had, but prior to this email, my understanding had always been that any data recorded on the whatever the repository was, BRDB, could never be deleted, amended, manipulated. All that could happen was a new transaction, a new entry being put in the balancing transaction, and that would be auditable. This, as it says in line 1 on the background, says very clearly that they have the ability to delete and edit transactions. Now that was entirely new information.
Do you know how widely the Project Bramble report was shared? So was it, to the best of your knowledge, was it provided to the Post Office Board?
To the best of my knowledge, I don't, but I can imagine it would have been.
And to the best of your knowledge, was the Project Bramble report provided to UKGI?
I honestly don't know, but since UKGI have a seat on the board, that would have had the same effect.
Please could we look at poll 30287070. Apologies. This is a further draft report called... Apologies, we're just waiting for a phone. Thank you. This is a further draft report, 3rd of October 2017. To what extent were you still engaged with Project Bramble at this point?
I don't know which one in the sequence this was. I think I'd listed, or you disclosed to me, 8 or 7 or 8 versions of iterations of this report. My level of engagement reduced over that time very markedly because I was moving away from anything to do with this subject area. But I was keeping, in loose touch just through discussions with Mark Underwood, who I think was the point person engaged with Deloitte colleagues in making sure they were getting what they needed. There is an email, I think, addressed to me from Mark Westbrook indicating that he was having some difficulty in getting what he needed out of Fujitsu. And I think simply because I was a more senior person than Mark Underwood at the time, he was effectively asking me to give them a nudge to accommodate the work that they were doing. But as I say, my involvement with Bramble dwindled quite rapidly. My last understanding of what it had found was that whilst the Horizon system was certainly not completely watertight, the steps one would need to take to overcome the various security controls would be really quite difficult to achieve, and that I think I say in my witness statement, it wasn't entirely clear to me why somebody at Fujitsu with the wherewithal and the right access rights would set their mind to doing that.
Well, if we look at the content of this and turn to page 7, please. Paragraph 1.4.2.6. It refers to a limited number of authorised Fujitsu personnel have sufficient privileges to theoretically add, delete, change data in the BRDB, called privileged users. It goes on to say, the bottom paragraph, through our inquiries, we have identified that 25 current privileged users, sorry, that's at the bottom of the page, please. Thank you. Through our inquiries, we have identified that 25 current privileged users have access to the KMS, that's the key management system, is it?
I don't know.
Such that they could theoretically cover up changes they make to the BRDB data. This is a failure by Fujitsu to implement its own segregation of duties policy. We are unable to determine how long this vulnerability has existed, as records of historic users are not kept. And then if we go over the page, please, we have, based on assertions from Fujitsu, paragraph 1.4.2.14, there's a key split in dates around the audit trail of privileged user usage in July 2015. Pre-July 2015, only super user log-on and log-off were logged. However, these are expected to be of low volume and would always, if valid accesses, be approved by a documented access form. And then after 2015, it refers to various audit data that was created. Now, looking back, what you were describing earlier of your knowledge and your understanding, is that effectively what's set out here? Do you think you would have read this report at the time and understood this to be the position that Deloitte was taking?
What's the date of this document, please?
It's 3rd of October 2017.
I mean, I think it's unlikely. I certainly, I mean, with the best will in the world, the documents are make for quite difficult reading, make hard reading, and I think unless you're sort of quite well versed in these matters, they would be, I would find it very difficult to draw sensible conclusions from it without considerable guidance, which I didn't have. So I think the answer to that is, the answer is no. I don't think so.
Well, let's go further on in the document, page 132, please. It's Appendix 7. It says clarification questions. The below clarification questions and associated answers attempt to provide clarity on queries arising from the content of the report, presumably questions that have been put by Post Office. Do you remember anything about that?
Not in the context of this exercise, no. I mean, by the...
I apologize, I spoke over you.
No, I was just going to say, by this time, this exercise was being done in the context of the group litigation. So, if you like, the internal client for these purposes were the people who were conducting the litigation rather than me.
Yes, but you did sit on the Postmaster Litigation Steering Group, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And remote access was a key issue in the group litigation, wasn't it?
Of course it was, yes.
And you were involved in establishing this project, correct?
Yes, yes.
And you say I think your involvement dwindled, but given your responsibilities on the steering group committee, do you not think you would have read these clarification questions and answers to understand what position or what advice Deloitte was providing?
The fact of being on the PLSG does not mean that I was the best person to, understand or query or challenge the information that being, also on the PLSG were people who were specifically employed by the company to deal with IT issues. So I'm afraid the answer is no. I didn't. I followed it as a matter of curiosity, but not with any great application or rigor.
How widely available, or no, let me rephrase that, sorry. To what extent were these Deloitte reports discussed in the Postmaster Litigation Steering Group?
I honestly don't recall. I really don't think they would have been gone through in any forensic detail, simply because they would have only really been intelligible to people with the necessary expertise. And I think it would have made for a very difficult and, I may say, so boring meeting for the majority of participants.
And can you recall passing on any of the Bramble reports to any other person outside of Post Office Limited?
No, because I don't think I didn't have custody of the Bramble reports.
Do you mean by that you didn't, when you say you didn't have custody, are you saying is your evidence you didn't have access to the Bramble reports?
I could have had access if I'd asked for it, but I didn't have routinely access to it. As I said in my witness, I'm amazed that it went on for as long as it did and produced so many reports. I simply had no knowledge of that. Or insofar as I did, it didn't register.
I wanted to now just cover a few topics on the group litigation itself.
Before you do, Mr. Stevens, and I'm sorry to be a bit interruptive today, so to speak, but I just want to put these things in a chronological order, if I can. This draft report of the 3rd of October 2017 appears to be describing a form of remote access which had hitherto not been known at the post office, but which seems to have existed from 2015. Right? Now, I'm not sure if I've got that right, but let's assume that for the moment. In Mr. Justice Fraser's judgments, he dealt with Legacy Horizon, which was from commencement to 2010, roughly, Horizon Online, and then a third version, which was extant when he was carrying on the proceedings. The question I want to ask you is, first, the third version, was that a version which was either in being and or under construction, if that's the right word, in or around 2015?
If you're addressing that question to me, so I'm afraid...
You don't know the answer, all right. Well, the next question, you may not know the answer to this either. Was there any attempt to understand whether what I'll call enhanced ability to remotely access outside the branch was available under either Legacy Horizon or Horizon Online, as opposed to the version which succeeded Horizon Online?
Again, I don't know. What I do know of the judgments, of course, is that, if I can characterize it, I think Mr. Justice Fraser described the first version, the Legacy Horizon, as being sort of full of holes. The second being rather better, but only the third version as being robust, comparable to other systems in use in other places.
Exactly so. But I was trying to work out in my own mind whether what we had here, putting it bluntly, was an ability, a function of remote access, which was enjoyed, in inverted commas, with Horizon Online, but nobody ever revealed it until much later. or whether the enhanced access, which is revealed in this draft report, came about either coincidentally or otherwise with the third version of Horizon. That's what I'm trying to establish.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't assist.
And you can't help. That's the top and bottom of it. All right, I'll have to make Mr. Stevens looks as if he may know the answer.
So I can assist by taking you through the document. They are quite...
Oh, well, don't waste the time with the witness.
Yes.
We can do certain things by you just educating me, Mr. Stevens.
Yes, I will do that. I'll cover it another time, but we'll leave it there with this witness. Thank you, sir. I was moving the group litigation. Please, could we bring up POL 25509? So these are terms of reference and membership for the Postmaster Litigation Steering Group. And if we go to the bottom, please. Thank you. We can see that you are a representative of corporate services. What was corporate services' role on the Postmaster Litigation Steering Group?
Corporate services was the temporary name given to the expanded legal team to include the audit and risk and information rights teams, as well as the security team as it evolved, as it reduced in size, and so it didn't have any. Save for the legal function, it didn't have any subject matter expertise to bring to the party in the way that perhaps other participants did.
And in practice, what would you say your role was on this committee?
Well, I think really in practice, I was on it really for two reasons. Partly as a sort of deputy for Jane McLeod as a sort of eyes and ears, and secondly because I might be able to offer some insight on the basis that I understood some of the issues that have been raised in the context of the scheme, which of course is only a very small sub-proportion of those who joined the group litigation.
Now, we earlier referred to the swift review recommendations and the crossover with the group litigation. To what extent was the recommendations in the swift review being pursued separately to the group litigation from the time that the claim form was served?
So my recollection is that all 8 recommendations were set in train as soon as we got the draft report from Sir Jonathan Swift. So that's to say the week of the 11th of January 2016, the finalised document was presented on the 8th of February. And then the proceedings, I think, were issued in July 2016, at which point advice was obtained from both Anthony Degar Robinson, the QC then with responsibility for the management of the litigation as a whole, as well as Jonathan Swift, QC, as the author of the Swift Review, as to whether it was appropriate to cease the work under the banner of the review, but carry out equivalent work under the banner of the litigation. And we double-checked that was something that was something that Jonathan Swift was agreeable to, which he was.
If we turn the page on this document, please, the terms of reference say that the objectives of the PLSG are to ensure that Post Office's defence of the claim first protects the network. What does that mean?
I think it simply means that it enables the running of 11,500 branches to continue without interruption.
As it's the rest is proportionately managed, does not place unplanned constraints or resources burdens on Post Office, consistent with business as usual practices. So, did the steering group have any responsibility for following up on the recommendations in the Swift review?
I don't believe so. Certainly not in formal terms. No.
So, who was responsible for keeping any oversight of the recommendations in the Swift review at this point?
I assume the legal team was appropriately supported by other specialists, whether in finance or elsewhere.
Please can we bring up Poll 20110 482. And could we go to page 3, please? We see here it's Jay McLeod's email of the 26th of July 2016, which you're copied into. It refers to briefing the group executive this morning on the progress on the litigation and the planned positioning of various issues. As expected, there was significant concern around the apparent change in emphasis from previous public statements, the resultant adverse publicity this may create and the impact this may have on new ministers who will not have been briefed. Sorry, and I should have said in the above, it says, in particular, I commented on the issues around the response to the remote access issue. Now, this was in the context, was it, of a couple of weeks earlier, the first Operation Bramble report being produced?
So I think that's right. It was certainly 13 days precisely after Andy Parsons sent me and others the email in which disclosed the fact that Fujitsu revealed the ability of super users to edit or otherwise manipulate existing data on the EARQ.
And were you involved in any in the discussion with the group executive?
No.
If we turn to Andrew Parsons' email, I think it's page 1, please. The bottom. It refers to Jane's email accurately records their current understanding. It says Deloitte are investigating the key questions. And then if we go up, he provides if you go up, to Jay McLeod's email, it talks about wording, and this is wording for the letter of response, isn't it? How to deal with remote access.
How to deal with remote access on the basis of incomplete information.
And what Jay McLeod suggests here is to write access to database. Database and server access and edit permission is provided within strict controls to a small controlled number of specialist Fujitsu personnel. Our current understanding is that although it may be possible theoretically to use these permissions in a way that could affect a branch's accounts, it is unclear why any such permissions would be used by those specialists in such a way. Any such use of these permissions in this way would, in the event, be logged and be subject to compliance with the specified controls. And then in brackets, we have asked Fujitsu to advise whether such permissions have ever been used in this way. You're not copied into that email. Did you have any discussions around this time with people within Post Office as to how to deal with the wording on remote access in the letter of response?
I don't recall doing so. I think it's fair to say that the 13th of July revelation, if I can put it that way, from Andy Parsons, caused a fair bit of consternation. So it would have been a subject of discussion generally between the people involved. But I don't think I had any role in actually finalising or suggesting particular forms of word that might accommodate what, as I say, was incomplete information. This was new information. We still hadn't got to the bottom of exactly what it meant, and Fujitsu hadn't provided us with the A to Z, it's a comprehensive answer that we were looking for. So given that the letter of response was due to go, I think, in very short order when this revelation was made, I think colleagues were looking at the best way of reflecting this new knowledge. And this is the sort of exchange that took place in order to do that.
Could we please look at Paul's 41259? It's an email from Andrew Parsons the following day, to which you're included on the recipient list. It says, please find attached the final version of the letter of response that we intend to send tomorrow. The only outstanding point is Tony's approval. That's presumably Anthony Degar-Robinson, KC.
That's correct, yes.
Approval of the remote access wording. Do you remember if you looked at this this copy of the letter of response?
I think I was sent it and asked whether or not I had any input to make. From memory, I did read it. I think I may have made one or two minor suggestions, but and I don't actually recall what those were and whether they related to this remote access point in particular.
Well, let's have a look at the draft that was attached. It's POL 30/41260, and if we could go to page 24. And if we can go down to paragraph 5.16.4. So, how it's drafted there, the last the last two sentences say, as far as we are currently aware, privileged administrator access has not been used to alter branch transaction data. We are seeking further assurance from Fujitsu on this point. And that was changed from previously where it says, the draft suggested, we have asked Fujitsu to advise whether such permissions have ever been used in this way. So this appears to, the draft that Jay McLeod sent has changed to this, and it appears to have gone from saying, we don't know if this access has been used this way, to, as far as we're aware, it hasn't been used in this way, but we're seeking further assurance. Are you aware of whether Fujitsu provided any input into whether the privileged administrator access had been used when drafting this version of the letter of response?
I don't think I am aware of whether or not they provided any input at this juncture.
I don't need to go there, sir, but for your reference, the version of this as sent is Pol 00110507. So looking at the time, I don't have that much more to go, but for the transcriber, I propose we take a short 10-minute break.
Yeah, sorry, could you give me that reference?
Oh, yes,
again?
I'm sorry, sir. I'm rushing through. It's Pol 00110507.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I'm told. Sorry, it's a 15-minute break, so I'm sorry. If we may, so that would be, can we say 20 past?
Jolly good.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Bourke, can you see and hear me?
I can, thank you.
Thank you. Please, could we bring up Mr. Bourke's witness statement, page 118, paragraph 275. Thank you. You say that in relation to specific aspects of disclosure, this is disclosure in the GLO, I'm asked about your knowledge of Fujitsu's known error log. You say it was and remains limited. I had a layman's understanding of what it was insofar as it had become part of the lexicon around the time of the group litigation, and I would hear the term referred to in conversation around Post Office Ltd. When did you first become aware of the known error log?
I think it was in the context of a PLSG meeting.
So, during your time on the scheme, as a scheme manager, no one in Post Office Ltd had discussed the known error log with you?
Not to the best of my knowledge, no.
And just explain in your own lay term what, I mean, is it fair to say that the known error log could be described as a log of known errors?
Yes, I believe that's right. I think I say elsewhere in my statement that I thought that it denoted a record, a sort of a live document, a live record of non-material issues that would crop up from time to time in the operation of the system.
Well, that point, non-material, where did you get that understanding from?
That's a fair question. I'm not sure I know. I formed the view, and this is quite possibly completely incorrect, that the known error log was recorded sort of hiccups, but I think the peak was more serious. But I don't recall now what peak even stands for, I'm afraid.
If we could look at POL 403340 and if we look at page 2, please. This is the Post Office's generic defence and counterclaim in the GLO proceedings, which I think in your evidence you say you reviewed at the time. Yes?
I think I've read, yes.
Can we turn please to page 23? This is paragraph 50. This is paragraph 50, subparagraph 4 in the generic defence. It refers to the known error log and says, to the best of Post Office's information and belief, the known error log is a knowledge-based document used by Fujitsu which explains how to deal with or work around minor issues that can sometimes arise in Horizon for which, often because of their triviality, system-wide fixes have not been developed and implemented. It is not a record of software coding errors or bugs for which system-wide fixes have been developed and implemented. To the best of Post Office's knowledge and belief, there is no issue in the known error log that could affect the accuracy of a branch's accounts or the secure transmission and storage of transaction data. Was this paragraph and Post Office's response ever discussed at the Postmaster Litigation Steering Group?
I don't know. I don't know. It may have been. I didn't attend every meeting of the PLSG, but I have no memory of that being discussed. No.
To the best of your knowledge, who would have given instructions for that paragraph to be pleaded?
I would have imagined, I don't know this for sure, but I would imagine it would have been Rob Houghton, who was, I think, by that stage, our Chief Information Officer.
Could we please look at POL 3023013? We see it's an email from Mark Underwood on the 25th of September 2018. It's sent to you, attaching papers ahead of a Postmaster Litigation Steering Group call. And one of those is whether Post Office should disclose the contents of the peak system to the claimants. If we look at that decision paper now, it's POL 3023013. Sorry, I've said the same. It's POL 3023014. My apologies. So it's talking about whether Post Office should disclose the peak system. And on voluntary disclosure, we see there, this paragraph 1.3.5, the Post Office has an ongoing duty to disclose adverse documents. Given the nature of the documents contained in the peak system, it is likely it will contain adverse documents, and therefore disclosure of these will need to be given at some stage. Now, pausing there, when did you first become aware of the peak system?
It would have been in the context of one of these meetings, but as I say, I don't know what peak refers to really.
Was any consideration given to whether the peak system needed to be reviewed for the purposes of considering the safety of past criminal convictions?
I don't know.
Bear with me one moment, please. Please could we turn up FUJ 30s81944. This is an email from Mark Underwood to Kevin Lenihan. You're copied into it. It says 4/7/2015. My understanding is that that's an Americanized date, and this is the 7th of April 2015. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And we see there are two attachments to this. One is receipts and payments mismatch issue notes, and one correcting accounts for lost discrepancies. I want to look at one of those, please, and that's FUJ 3081946. Do you recall reading this document when it was sent to you?
Yes, I think so. Though I think it was the other document which I was focused on. But yes.
This says, this note relates to peaks and then gives the numbers. Then it says PC 02042263 describes a problem with the stock unit balancing that will result in a receipts and payments mismatch. At this point, did you inquire as to what the peak database was?
No.
Why not?
Because what was being brought to my attention through this document was something else, which was a reference in the other document to the two things. One, effectively the balancing transaction issue, which we've spoken about, and secondly, some language in there that seemed to suggest that Fujitsu could remotely access the branch accounts more freely than we thought possible.
Right. Well, let's look at that just for completeness. It's FUJ 3081945. Is this the document you're referring to?
Yes, it is.
And this is a well-known document to the inquiry regarding the receipts and payments mismatch bug. And at page 3, is this to what you're referring? The solution 1 it refers to alter the horizon branch figure at the counter to show the discrepancy. Fujitsu would have to manually write an entry value to the local branch account. And then it says risk has significant data integrity concerns and could lead to questions of tampering with the branch system and could generate questions around how the discrepancy was caused. This solution could have moral implications of Post Office changing branch data without informing the branch. That's what you were referring to earlier.
So that's the balancing transaction issue, I think. I seem to recall, and perhaps it's not in this document, but somewhere I think in this document there's some language that seems to suggest that Fujitsu have had the ability to do to remotely access branch accounts more freely than we'd understood. And this was brought to my attention by Second Sight on the eve of the finalisation of the Part 2 report on the 8th or 9th of April 2015. And immediately on receipt, I remember instructing Mark Underwood and Andy Parsons to work with Fujitsu to put me in a position to be able to respond to the suggestion being made by Ian Henderson with something meaningful and accurate to go back to him with. They also consulted Pete Newsom, who at that time confirmed and was very insistent upon the fact that whilst the language might point to a more easy remote access than we thought possible, he considered it to be loose language by non-experts, and that he was confirming absolutely that the only way that this could be done was through a balancing transaction which would leave an auditable trail. And those are the terms upon which I then replied to Ian Henderson on, I think, the 8th of April, and he finalised the report on that basis. But the information is contained in section 17, if I'm not mistaken, of the Part 2 report. Sorry, section 14, if I'm not mistaken, of the Part 2 report.
So we've had actually had an application for core parties to ask questions on that issue. So I'm going to leave that there, and one of the core participants will deal with it. I've just got one last question. It's on your witness statement, please. Page 124, paragraph 294. Sorry, wrong way around. Page 124, paragraph 294. You say it's at the bottom of the page, actually. If you could just go down a little more, please. I therefore join myself to the apology Post Office Ltd has quite rightly made for its failings during this period. Why have you used the term you join yourself to the apology?
Well, look, I've thought long and hard about this, and I'm obviously also aware of the various apologies that have been made by previous participants to this inquiry. As I say in the preceding lines, I personally think that I was engaged in some good faith exercises that I did perform to the best of my ability. I wasn't involved in the prosecutions, I wasn't involved in disclosure failings, and I fear that if I were to say I have a personal apology to make, that would be, potentially derided by those it was intended for. If you ask me what I genuinely feel, it is more in the nature of, I wouldn't be human if I didn't think that, if I didn't regret massively what all the sort of upset, destruction, distress that's been occasioned by this dreadful saga for all of those affected, but particularly for those people who are wrongly prosecuted and wrongly convicted. But that is a human sentiment, and it is meant very, very genuinely. But whatever failings Paul made in the context of improper disclosure in the prosecutions of certain individuals prior to my joining the Post Office, it just feels to me to be a bit hollow for me to apologise for those things. But as a representative of the organisation, I do absolutely want to join myself to the apology that it's made, because it was quite right to have made.
Where you say Paul has quite rightly made for its failings during this period, what do you consider its failings to be?
Well, as best I understand it, and having looked at this, the developments that we've seen from in recent years, and particularly the quashings of convictions in, I think, April 2021 onwards, there was obviously some real deficiency in the disclosure deficiency in the process of prosecution through a failure of disclosure in those cases, with the appalling result that people who might have otherwise had a defence were left without one to make, or had one fewer defences to make. So anybody who is on the receiving end of something like a custodial sentence, or even not a custodial sentence, as a result of having their criminal procedural rights infringed, you'd have to be, as I say, completely heartless not to feel deep pain and sorry for that.
Do you think Post Office Limited is responsible for any failings, or was responsible for any failings, whilst you were employed by it from 2014 onwards?
Well, I've no doubt that it got a number of things wrong, but in respect of, to be perfectly honest, I think that question is too broad, really, to answer sensibly. No doubt we could have approached things differently. One can always make improvements, but my observation of the time that I was engaged in these matters is that certainly myself and all the people who were working around me were working to the best of their ability in good faith. We did find it frustrating because we didn't seem to achieve any cut through at all with those people either applying to the scheme or their supporters in Parliament. And it's a regret that we didn't find a device to sort of put things more differently. But beyond that, I think I'll remain. I'll stick with what I've said.
Thank you, sir. That concludes my questions. We have had applications from core participants to ask some questions. I understand it will be Ms. Page first, it will be about 10 minutes, then Mr. Maloney will be, I think, less than 5 minutes, and 10 minutes from Mr. Steen. I think you're on mute, sir.
I just said, all right. Over to you, Ms. Page.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bourke, as Mr. Stevens has said, there's an issue that I want to ask you about, and it is to do with the 11th hour response to Second Sight's Part 2 report, which dealt with the Solution 1 meeting, didn't it?
The Solution 1 meeting?
The Solution 1 meeting, the meeting at which Solution 1, that may be shorthand for us in the inquiry that you're not perhaps quite as familiar with, but Solution 1 was offered up, wasn't it, by Fujitsu as a means of dealing with the receipts and payments mismatch bug.
The balancing transaction, yes.
Yes. Now, what I want to do first is just look at the email chain where you set up the meeting with Fujitsu, which you referred to. That's poll 0035322224. And if we go, please, to page 3. This email was, yes, if we go please to page 3, we'll see how the chain sort of gets kicked off. The second paragraph, this is Mark Underwood, and you're copied in, and this is Mark Underwood basically seeking that sort of 11th hour response. And in the second paragraph, he says, back in 2010, a bug was identified in Horizon, which caused a receipts and payments mismatch issue. Second Sight has been provided with documents. So those documents were the notes of the meeting and Gareth Jenkins' report, yes, on the bug. And it says this at the end of the paragraph: Second Sight are not interested in the bug itself, but rather the method by which Post Office could have edited branch data to resolve the bug. So that's what is being investigated at the 11th hour just before the Part 2 report is to be published, yes?
Yes.
And then if we just scroll down, what the email does is it quotes the Solution 1 wording. And in particular, it refers to that question of risk. This has significant data integrity concerns and could lead to questions of tampering with the branch system. So again, that's what's being looked at, isn't it? That's the sort of key concern.
Yes.
All right, well, if we go up to page 1, we see that then there's your follow-up to that, stressing the urgency. And if we just scroll down a little bit, that's it. That's your email saying, thanks all. Needless to say, it's really important that we do have something meaningful and accurate to go back to Second Sight with at some point tomorrow. And then you suggest this meeting between Mark Underwood, Pete Newsom, that's the Fujitsu man, yes? Is that right?
Yes, yes.
And Andrew Parsons. And you suggest that they have that meeting and they're going to then discuss how to respond to that key concern, aren't they?
Yes.
So I can say just for the record that there is then a diary appointment the following morning, but there's nothing in writing from Fujitsu. So it must be that meeting at which the response from Fujitsu is consolidated. Is that right? Is that your recollection?
It's not my recollection, but if you say so, yes.
All right, thank you. Following that meeting, if we then look at your response to Second Sight, it's poll 00029836. If we go to page 2, please. If we scroll up just a little bit, we can see that this is your email to Ian Henderson of Second Sight and Jane McLeod, your general counsel, copied into those various people, including Ron Warmington of Second Sight and Mark Underwood, who was at the meeting with Fujitsu. And then if we scroll down a little bit to the bottom of page 2, if we can just look at the penultimate paragraph, you say this: the language used in the documents produced by Post Office / Fujitsu and to which you refer is unfortunate colloquial shorthand used by those working on the Horizon system. I can see how it could be read to suggest that Post Office was, quote, altering branch data, but the above explains why this is not the case. And so that is presumably what you mean when you said to Mr. Stevens just a little while ago that Mr. Newsom was insistent that the use of the word tampering was loose language by non-experts. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
And so you composed this based on what Mr. Newsom said in that meeting?
No, the email was composed through a combination of Andy Parsons and myself and others, and other, I think, documents that I've exhibited to my witness statement show very clearly that there were some track changes in this document that point to the fact that this was a collaborative effort, but there was a substantial input from...
Sorry, can I just focus in, though, on this point about colloquial language? That was based, presumably, on Mr. Newsom saying that there had been loose language by non-experts at the meeting when Solution 1 was offered. Is that right?
That's my recollection, yes.
Now, loose language is one thing, colloquial language is another. We could also characterise it in this way, couldn't we, Mr. Bourke? It's deeply troubling language, isn't it, if somebody says that there's a capacity to tamper with branch accounts? Would you accept that?
Yes, I can accept that, yes.
Thank you. The email can come down now. Whether or not those at the meeting where Solution 1 was discussed were experts, what they do say, what those Fujitsu people must have said, was that Fujitsu was able to tamper with branch accounts. And that's what was being investigated. As Mr. Stevens established with you earlier, Mr. Bourke, you did not know anything about whether that had happened during the lifetime of Legacy Horizon, did you?
No.
And yet your response to Second Sight was, in effect, to dismiss the idea that there had ever been any tampering, wasn't it?
I was relaying the information that was provided to me by Fujitsu. And the only other point I'd raise in this context is that this is information that Second Sight had had for some considerable time prior to raising it with me on the eve of the finalisation of the Part 2 report.
Nevertheless, in your formal response, or rather in Post Office Limited's formal response to the Part 2 report, that wording from your email was used almost word for word. I won't take you to it because, as I say, it's more or less the same, but I'll give the reference. Poll 0004 1059. And the relevant bit is at page 57. So your email was used as the Post Office's formal response to that section of the Part 2 report. Now, in fact, one of the Post Office employees who attended the meeting at which Fujitsu offered up Solution 1 was a gentleman called Andrew Wynne. He has told this inquiry that he was the person who signed off on Fujitsu's use of the power to insert transactions into branch accounts. It would have been a simple matter, would it not, to have talked to the Post Office employees who went to the meeting when Solution 1 was offered up, wouldn't it?
If you're suggesting that that's something that I could have done, sensibly, yes. But given that this was not new information, I think it was reasonable to expect that this had been bottomed out prior.
Well, you've told us that you didn't know whether Solution 1 or the tampering facility was used during the lifetime of Legacy Horizon. It would have been perfectly reasonable at this juncture, given the seriousness of what Second Sight was suggesting, to try to find out, at least by speaking to those Post Office employees who had been at the meeting and who were still in the employ of Post Office at that time. Wouldn't it?
Well, yes, but I have no way of knowing whether that happened or not. I can tell you that I didn't do it, no.
You took at face value from an interested party, that is Fujitsu, what they wished to say by way of a gloss on the wording of Solution 1, instead of finding out the truth from Post Office's own staff. Didn't you?
Well, no, because, as I've said throughout my witness statement, I was in the habit of taking at face value the views and the expertise offered to me. I had no reason at this point to doubt the veracity of what I was being told by Fujitsu. We are not at this stage in 2024, but instead in 2015.
In Second Sight's report, they were giving you the reason to doubt it. They were suggesting that there was another way that you could look at this information, and you had other ways to look at it. And instead, you just took the interested party's view instead of the disinterested party's view. That is Second Sight's view. Didn't you?
I wouldn't characterize it that way, but...
This is part of a culture of denial and turning a blind eye when disinterested and legitimate concerns were being raised. Wasn't it, Mr. Bourke?
You refute that.
I think the witness said, I don't accept that, or words to that effect.
That's what I understood, Ms. Page, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Is it Mr. Maloney next?
So, yes, thank you. Mr. Bourke, you told Mr. Stevens that at one point, when relations with Second Sight were breaking down, Post Office contemplated enforcement action, including demanding the return by Second Sight of all documents provided to them during the mediation scheme, yes?
No, I said that we would envisage doing so if there was a very serious breach of that confidentiality.
Yeah. And you said to Mr. Stevens that your overriding concern in doing so was to preserve the personal data of the applicants to the mediation scheme.
Yes, I think that's right.
Yeah. With that overriding concern in mind, did you ever ask for the return of personal data of the applicants that had been provided to the JFSA?
I can't recall.
Because they'd received much of the same material that Second Sight had received, hadn't they?
Well, yes, but they would have received only that which pertained to them, rather than to pertain to the whole group of 136. So it is, given it's their personal data, the concerns were obviously less significant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bourke.
Mr. Steen.
Mr. Bourke, you gave evidence earlier today, and you were discussing the ability of sub-postmasters to consider the audit trail, okay? And your evidence related to a question of, as you were talking about, you thought for legacy horizon that sub-postmasters might have something like 42 days to consider what was on the audit trail, and you thought that perhaps in relation to online, it might be longer, something like 50 or 60 days. Now, we're going to, with the inquiry, look into that in more detail. But does it help to be reminded that it was more likely to be from trading period to trading period? In other words, that it related this period of time with which any examination within the branch could take place would have had to have taken place between the trading periods that existed at the time. Is that fair?
I hesitate here because I'm not sure my expertise extends that far, but my understanding is that postmasters were required to do a number of checks on a daily, weekly, and then monthly basis, and that the period of time for which the information was available reflected was sufficient to enable them to discharge their contractual responsibilities.
Right. Well, the inquiry's heard evidence about the balancing period and how long that took, and I won't go back into that. Did you, when considering what you were going to be saying by way of your evidence for this inquiry, did you, by any chance, watch or read the evidence of sub-postmasters as they'd given it in the earlier stages of the inquiry?
Do you mean in phase one?
Yep.
Yes, I watched some of it, yes.
Do you remember that sub-postmasters would talk about the fact that they would spend their evenings and sometimes nights trying to make sense of the material that they had before them, that they would neglect their families and their relationships, and all that they could do was try and make some sense of the material that they had, because it didn't make sense to them. Do you remember that evidence?
I do. What I would say is that there are, for every one of those people who are having difficulties, and I don't suggest for a second they weren't having difficulties, and I feel for them in that respect, there were thousands of others who were managing to do this on a daily basis across the UK.
Well, so you're saying, are you, that the sub-postmasters that had those difficulties, they brought it upon themselves, that they're the ones that perhaps could have done things somewhat better, as against the ones that didn't make complaints, because apparently they were better than the people that had the problems? Is that what you're trying to say, Mr. Bourke?
No, all I'm trying to say is that some people would have experienced difficulties, but actually a large number of people didn't, and that doesn't make one or the other better than the other. It's just a...
But do you recognise that for the people that were having these difficulties, trying to find some way of making some understanding or some better understanding of the material that they had, when it literally would not make sense for hours and hours, are you seeking to say that that is something that perhaps maybe they should put behind them and get on with their lives?
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. But I don't know whether that information they were looking at did or did not make sense. For example, in the mediation scheme, there were cases where postmasters did not understand things, but actually they had the wherewithal to get to the right conclusions. And for whatever reason, they'd either forgotten the training or what have you. So, all I'm saying is that it is possible that another postmaster might have made sense of those. And
there speaks someone, Mr. Bourke, yourself, who has in fact either no or little understanding about how these matters occurred within branches, as you said earlier. Is that fair, Mr. Bourke?
Well, no, I don't
Giving your opinion about matters that you don't actually understand yourself?
No, I don't think it is fair. I'm simply putting to you the opposite hypothesis.
Okay, let's have a look at the document and see whether that helps about your attitude to matters. Document is POL 00246 340. So POL 00246 340. Right, and if we look at the top line, we'll see there that this is a reference to a meeting that's due to take place. As you can see there, it includes you, Patrick Bourke, and The meeting is Tuesday at 3 p.m. and you'll see there that under attachments, references are there to the 6th of December, okay? Now we're now going to have a look at another document, which is POL 00246342. So this is a document that is being referred to in relation to the meeting, as you can see there, the 6th of December 2016. The meeting email that we've just looked at included such people as Ms van der Bogaard, Mr Williams and yourself and others. So this is in relation to the, as we can see, top left-hand corner, Postmaster Group Action, confidential and legally privileged. As we go down here, under background, it says Post Office has commissioned Deloitte to investigate remote access issues within Horizon. Deloitte need input from Fujitsu, including its engagement at various workshops. However, it goes on to say Fujitsu is refusing to cooperate unless it is paid for its services. And then it goes on to talk about two particular matters. Fujitsu has arguably contributed to the need for Deloitte's investigations. And then it refers to, in short form, I'll put it in the bullet points, statements about remote access. And if you look at the bottom line of that paragraph, it refers to the fact that Fujitsu has contributed to the allegation that Post Office has concealed an ability to change transaction data. And then next bullet point is Gareth Jenkins. And then it says this, Fujitsu put forward Gareth Jenkins, one of the key engineers of Horizon, to give evidence in criminal prosecutions. And then following a review by Brian Altman QC, Post Office was advised that Mr Jenkins' evidence was incomplete because his statements led the court to believe there were no issues with Horizon when Mr Jenkins knew that there were. And then it goes on to talk about the damage to Mr Jenkins' credibility. Let's just pause there for a moment and just deal with the Mr Jenkins question. So in this meeting in relation to December of 2016, by that date, do you know whether Fujitsu had been told that there were these credibility damaging issues in relation to Mr Jenkins or not?
No, I don't.
Right. So we've got then two matters that are being considered, and then it goes on to say at that page, under the Gareth Jenkins bullet point, in a more general sense, the fortunes of Post Office and Fujitsu are entwined. And then if you scroll further down, if you would please, there would therefore seem to be good, albeit self-interested, reasons why Fujitsu may wish to assist the Post Office. And then if we look further down there under the issues, Post Office may therefore wish to consider whether it's best to either pay Fujitsu for its time in assisting Deloitte and not raise the above matters, or use the above points to persuade Fujitsu to provide its support in relation to the group litigation at reduced zero-hour cost. Okay?
Yep.
So in relation to these particular questions, do you know whether the Post Office decided to try and extort Fujitsu into the position whereby it was going to support the Post Office's position within the litigation? Do you know whether that was what was decided or not, Mr. Bourke?
I don't, but the cooperation of Fujitsu in the Deloitte work was an issue which had been raised to my attention. And indeed, I spoke to Mr. Stevens about it this afternoon, where it was clear that they were not providing the sort of access and information that Deloitte needed to complete its work on what was then Project Bramble. So clearly, my intervention did not meet with any success because had it, this piece of paper would not have been needed.
Well, Mr. Bourke, do you think it's appropriate that an institution such as the Post Office, wholly owned by the government, is thinking about trying to twist the arm of a corporation such as Fujitsu by saying, look, this is what you've done to us, you better help out, otherwise these issues may become known. Do you think that's an appropriate way for the Post Office to behave, Mr. Bourke?
Well, it's not something I would have done, no.
Well, did you say at this meeting, well, I think this is horrendous. We can't in all good conscience try and make Fujitsu do this sort of thing in this way, Right, why don't we have an honest approach to them and say, look, there are real issues here we ought to consider together that affect people's lives, Mr. Bourke?
So I don't know whether that approach had not already been tried and not met with success. It may be that approach was tried, did not meet with success, and so this is, the third attempt to try and get their cooperation. And you can understand in the context that these are really important matters, if you just outlined, that people are struggling to see how else we can bring them to the table and to cooperate.
And lastly, Mr. Bourke, you've discussed with Mr. Stevens the last few questions today the level of your own personal responsibility. You said that you, as an example, you weren't someone that was stopping disclosure. Well, did you at this time consider the question of whether this information that was apparently being considered to be used to arm wrestle or twist the arm of Fujitsu to cooperate, did you stop and consider whether it might be helpful for the sub-postmasters to know this, rather than you weaponising it?
I'm sorry, but I just didn't have contact with the litigation at all. And insofar as these were new revelations to me as much as anybody else. So given that the prosecutions in which, disclosure failings took place predated my arrival at the Post Office, I think that's a bit of a stretch.
So not for your consumption, Mr. Bourke. Let somebody else try and make those decisions. You're not prepared to enter into the consideration of whether sub-postmasters should know about Mr. Jenkins. That's your excuse. Is that right, Mr. Bourke?
It's by no means an excuse. We had any number of eminent lawyers engaged in this matter. We have had general counsels, we have legal departments, we've had advice from Brian Norton, we've had Simon Clark giving advice. Of all the people who might be providing advice on this issue, I should think I was one of the least likely people to offer it.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Steen. Is that it, Mr. Stevens?
Yes, sir, that's it.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Bourke, very much for your very detailed witness statement and for answering questions during the course of today. I'm grateful to you. So we'll resume again at 9:45 tomorrow with Ms. Sewell. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.